All right, well, welcome to the 2021 Annual Member Gathering of the Washtenaw Bicycling and Walking Coalition. As folks know, we gather every year to celebrate with our membership and talk about our accomplishments of the past year and talk about things in the future that we're looking forward to doing, vote on new board members, and also have a guest speaker that will provide context, speakers that will provide context to sort of our mission, right? That what they talk about is work that's being done either in our community or in other communities that aligns with our mission. So our agenda is going to be pretty brief, actually. So we're going to have a 2021 year in review and looking forward to 2022. And there is the board member election that's happening. And I'll post the link for that, or someone else can post the link for that actually in the chat there, so folks can vote for the board members. And then we've got our guest speaker, and then we've got a prize drawing. And this is 20 years of the WBWC. And all of the 20,001 members are eligible to win prizes. And we encourage folks to join and renew. If you happen to be on the call and you're not a member, or you need to renew, you can go to wbwc.org/join to renew or join. The more members that we have, the stronger that we are, the more of a voice that we have in the community, and you get a host of benefits, including discounts at local stores, bike shops, and access to resources that we provide to the membership. And so just to remind folks of our mission, it's to make Washtenaw County the national leader in bicycling and walking by improving facilities, policies, and community support through advocacy and education. And of course, you can learn more at the WBWC.org website. And so here are our 2021 highlights. Take it away, Matt.
Sure. Thanks again, whether you're a member, volunteer, or just interested in the organization. Hopefully you have a good takeaway from what we learned tonight here. Like I said, we'll keep things straightforward with just a review of a few select achievements since our last meeting, followed by a reveal of what's to come in the future ahead. So it's my belief that the significant progress in safety and convenience in our community can be reflected in our mission, which is read before our board meetings each month, just to remind us what we're aiming for. So I know you saw that. I don't know if we actually read through it or not, but just for prosperity's sake, it's to make Washtenaw County a national leader in bicycling and walking by improving facilities, policies, and community support through advocacy and education. So considering the main points of that statement, while I kind of run down the significant accomplishments of 2021 within our community, acknowledging that some of these are just a reflection of our membership and actually, grew out of, I guess, organically without direct WBWC involvement. So most recently, as some of you may be aware of through some of our efforts regarding East Medical Center Drive Bridge, for the planned redesign of the bridge, WBWC provided suggestions to include improvements for bicycles and walkers, and the Ann Arbor City Council authorized the addition of some of those improvements in the design contract. We found that to be a win in our minds, and then also we noticed that there was quite a bit of we saw some feedback, people signing up to volunteer with us after the publication of that support. The Bandamer Bike Park, over the summer of 2021, there was consistent volunteer effort to both rebuild and restore Ann Arbor's bike park pump track. That was one of the things that we weren't necessarily directly involved with, but I think some of our membership probably was excited to see that happening, and it was kind of a good sign of the pulse of cycling in Ann Arbor. Additionally, within Bandamer is the Bandamer-Barton connection. Ann Arbor and Washtenaw County have agreed to jointly fund the design and engineering of the long-planned railroad underpass to link the border trail from Bandamer Park to Barton and Huron River Drive, which is a significant connection of the border trail in our minds. I think that people really enjoy that. You can see there's a rendering of that in the right side of the graphic we're looking at right now. The First Street Bikeway, while that was actually established in 2020, and I think this was the summer of 2021 was the first time that people got to really enjoy it in the warmer weather. And I'll just remind everybody that it did win 7th Best New American Bikeway of 2020, as voted on by People for Bikes. One of our more significant efforts this last year is the Packard Bikeway Task Force. Out of a committee of our members, we meet regularly with stakeholders, townships, cities, county commissioners to try to push for more equitable connection for people of Ypsilanti to Ann Arbor along what the corridor seems to make the most sense based on our analysis of looking at the different routes between the two areas. So I think that that's made a lot of progress. I mean, now with the most recent Healthy Streets improvements and rollout, there are now enhanced permanent bike lane improvements all along Packard between Eisenhower and 23. So that is shows progress for that, and we're going to keep pushing. That's one of the things that we will keep pushing for in the next year. Division Street Bikeways, construction is underway for that, and that'll be the third bikeway connecting William Street and First Street all together. And then you have bicycle signs, bicycle signals in Ann Arbor, which is a new thing for many, I think, to see. And it shows, the kind of feeling that bicycles belong on many of these, infrastructure, roadways, bike paths, whatnot. When you start to see lights that are kind of designated for us, I think it means something for people out there on bikes. And you can see a quick graphic of that in a photo too. And additionally, you have First Street Bikeway, a person riding on the First Street Bikeway. And on the far right of the underneath 2021 highlights, you'll see the rendering of the Division Street Bikeway that's under construction right now. In the lower left corner, you have the border-to-border connection that we advocated for and supported under the East Medical Center Drive Bridge most recently. In the center, you have an expansion of infrastructure for bicyclists and pedestrians over I-94 in Ypsilanti on Grove Road. I haven't had a chance to actually check that out myself. I know it is relatively recent. And then in the lower right corner, you have some of our community support efforts where this year we kind of took on the role of hosting and organizing the Bike to Work Day, or the kind of revised vision of Bike to Work Day as a fall event. So what I just recently mentioned, with some other exceptions, were some of the facilities that have been seeing improvements recently. I'm just going to do a quick list of some of the policies that we also provide support for. Suggestions that are incorporated into the plans as they got developed. So it's the A2 transportation plan. Comments and feedback were provided. The University of Michigan President's Commission on Carbon Neutrality. The Ypsilanti non-motorized plan. Additionally, we provided support for rescinding Ann Arbor resolution that required community engagement and approval for lane reductions. So I think because of that is why we're able to see a lot more of these kinds of projects that encourage our community to get out on bikes and walk and feel more safe out there with the, less vehicles they have to contend with and more dedicated space. And then also we encourage support for increased bike lane level of service. Hopefully we'll see that resolution provide significant changes for winter maintenance of bikeways. I know it included some sweeping of the greenways and bikeways, so it could be potentially a quite good change for people in the streets. House Bill 4014, alternative to the 85% rule for establishing speed limits. We're hoping that as that moves through, that will be something that could change some of the issues that we're running into with the Packard Bikeway Task Force, as Packard travels through different townships and has speed limits that discourage certain types of infrastructure that we've been advocating for. Community support. We have a new Instagram account this year, and I'd like to take this time to quick special thanks to some of our communications volunteers. Kylie, Instagram, she's really taken control of that and done a great job for us. And we've gotten lots of activity from that. Scott Franz on Twitter and Jeff Gaynor on Facebook. I mean, without these folks, I don't think we'd have as much coverage as we currently do. It's one of those things that once you have somebody in there that knows what they're doing and takes a good control of that, you realize how important those things are, especially moving forward with some of our things we want to take advantage of in the near future. Eisenhower Park Pathway Plan, our Eisenhower Park Walking Pathway, was something that was brought out by community members, Peter Hook, and we were provided support for that. And we were happy to see that that tool in the Ann Arbor kind of Parks and Recreation Adopt a Park plan is something that we're able to kind of support and see new pathway development happen from a grassroots level, more or less. Also, outside of kind of our regular area, and Moving Milan Forward had reached out to us about installing bike pumps in their community, and we kind of sponsored and kicked off that project for them. And that's really great to see. We're always happy to reach out beyond the usual areas that we work with. So those are the main things. I mean, there are a list of other things. I'll try not to take too much time, keep it straightforward. Tree Line Conservancy, we're always in support of that. All the DDA street improvement projects, state street improvements, we always try to put ourselves as stakeholders in there to make sure we're giving feedback that our members speak out for. Healthy Streets Program reprisal. Again, I had mentioned that with Packard having now enhanced permanent bikeways on many of the stretches. Reconfiguration in Ypsilanti, I had mentioned the picture there over Grove Street, but also Huron Cross, Hamilton, Washtenaw, to improve overall safety, especially for pedestrian and bicyclists, things that we advocate for. I think that's probably, I'm sure I'm leaving things out there, but that's quite a bit of stuff that we can be pretty proud of this year. Seems like so much stuff is happening, and I'm really hopeful for the future. If you go to the next slide, and you can see some of the things that we're going to be looking for going ahead. Well, first on this list is something that our membership and our board has been kind of mulling over lately, and we're excited about with the name change with WBWC. It's anytime we have to talk with anybody, the Washtenaw Bicycling and Walking Coalition can be a mouthful, and I find myself tripping over it oftentimes as well. So if you'll see in the chat, we've attached some, or we can attach in the chat a option to look at some of the different things that we're thinking about with WBWC. I think most of us have landed on Walk, Bike, Washtenaw, which is just WBW. But to maintain the WWC acronym, if that's important, we have options for Walk, Bike, Washtenaw County, or Walk, Bike, Washtenaw Coalition. So feel free to take a look at that. That's something that we're hoping to roll out, and we're thinking that just the more clean look of it will, new logos and whatnot will help us at least be clear, getting our message across, so nobody will be tripping over Washtenaw Bicycling and Walking Coalition anymore. Secondly, we want to grow our volunteer opportunities. Just as I had mentioned earlier, it was thanks to some of our communications volunteers that we've really been able to make strides on the social media platforms and reach a much broader audience when it comes to advocating for the things that are important to us. So we really want to continue with that. And, it's one of these things that we've always really wanted to reach out to volunteer opportunities, but we haven't been the greatest about following up with them and figuring out avenues for volunteers to take on. So hopefully with that, amongst the other things that we have in our looking ahead, we'll be able to find a lot more opportunities for volunteers and roles for them to take leadership. And we're going to continue prioritizing the Packard Bikeway. We have a pretty strong committee working on that. And like I said, the stakeholders in there are always very curious and happy to hear what we have to say. And from what we've heard from our members, it's something that there's a high demand for, having that kind of corridor of safety between Ann Arbor and Ypsilanti. Strengthen the community support. There has been, with the kind of last 2 years of some of the more social aspects of the community, bicycling and walking kind of struggling a little bit. I feel like lately there's been, it's kind of coming back. There are bike-in events, there's bike to work day events, things like that. So we really want to, in coordination with our volunteer opportunities. We want to, do more community support efforts and figure out ways where we can, put in any kind of effort if it's going to be more people on bikes, more people out walking. So that's one of our main goals going forward. And then this kind of comes from the membership. We kind of work with a committee and some of our members that a lot of people keep reaching out about bicycle parking. So we're hoping that we can kind of tackle some bicycle parking reform in Ann Arbor, and particularly amongst the university or employment centers like that in the county. It seems to be a real big issue where, people, if they're using a bike to get to work or go to the store, that they arrive somewhere and it's just not an adequate place for them to have to park a bike, or really it's not designed for somebody that's not arriving in an alternative means of transportation. I think is part of the approach for that. So, and then lastly, but not least, is further work towards completing B2B segments and sidewalk gaps in the county and city. So that's what we're going to be looking forward to taking on in the next few months and through the year. So that's all I have for that.
Excellent. Thanks, Matt.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're going to move on to the section of the Board of Directors election. And current members may use the link in the chat. You must include your email address to verify your membership. Up for re-election are Matt, Larry Deck, and myself. And feel free to vote. You can vote throughout the duration of this. Again, that link is in the chat there to the Google form to vote. And to provide a little bit of background, this is for folks that don't know, WBWC is an all volunteer organization. And so all of these board members are folks that are passionate about walking and biking and supporting it as a way of life and as a way of opportunity for everyone. So all of the people who contribute, board members and other volunteers and the membership make us strong as a group. So everyone's efforts are very much appreciated. And so now I want to get on to the talk segment of our meeting here, and that is safe, equitable travel in the U.S., ideas on how to talk and organize our way there. Seth is the Associate Director of Health and Community Sciences at the University of North Carolina Highway Safety Research Center, and is going to discuss ongoing research that taps into some of the ways we talk about road trauma and the people who use active travel modes, exploring how we might begin shifting the narrative to foster greater, more widespread interest in the safety and health of our communities. So I'm going to stop sharing now, and our guest speaker can now present if they want. Actually, you might, Seth Peterson, you might have to actually allow screen sharing. Actually, I think you've enabled it for everyone, so that should be good. Yeah, okay, there we go. Perfect.
All right, you're seeing that okay?
Yep.
All right, wonderful. Well, thank you, Jamie, and for the introduction. And I want to really thank Fred for reaching out and inviting me to join y'all. I mean, it's really inspiring to hear of all the work that you've been up to, and also what you're kind of looking forward to in the next year. Also, great to see another Seth here. So shout out to you, Seth. I will say, yeah, I think the fourth bullet that you had on what looking ahead is what I'll really speak most directly to. But I certainly hope a lot of this resonates with all of you. It's sort of what I'll talk about today is a research project I had done with some of our colleagues. So as Jamie laid out, I'm part of the Highway Safety Research Center at the University of North Carolina. And it's actually getting pretty cold down here, believe it or not, as well, just sort of ushered in. So I don't understand the Michigan cold necessarily, but certainly we feel it sometimes down here. We looked at something that is, I think there's a growing awareness in our field of basically the discourse around active, healthy travel, around road safety, And we wanted to get a sense of how the sort of mainstream broadcast TV news was talking about this issue. So that's sort of just setting this up really quickly. The premise for this really, who here has heard about Vision Zero? Has everyone sort of heard of this concept? It looks like Fred, that's good that you have. I'm sure you're in the field. Yeah, it looks like Larry had, okay. So yeah, it's the basic principle, the idea that no one should die or seriously be injured on our roadway, right? It's a very simple concept, but it's extremely hard to achieve. Our friends at the Vision Zero Network, so this is a group that basically connects a lot of these Vision Zero communities or adopting communities around the country, has summarized a lot of what we know about the sort of safety-oriented research. So we know that we can get about 75% there just based upon existing tools and technologies, things like this. The problem is that a lot of these are, as you probably know, right? A lot of these are not necessarily technical problems, they're political and social problems. Without a significant portion, or at least 25%, that's our estimate at least, about a quarter, of the public perceiving road trauma and inequitable access to community life as pressing social problems, we're not going to see the gains that we need to see in terms of safety, in terms of more people out there walking and biking. That's our premise. We know that in the US, on average, about 40,000 people die in traffic crashes each year. We're looking at this year, we're looking at the highest number since 2006. This is actually unique in the kind of wealthy Western world. Our European colleagues, our Australasian colleagues are not seeing this sort of increase at the same time. We are on a track to break 40,000 deaths this year, largely due to speeding related issues. And we know that despite what we're seeing, more and more communities, several dozen now, have adopted this Vision Zero idea. The public and policymakers really have yet, based upon our indication, to really prioritize road trauma as a serious public health problem. We think this is for two main reasons. There are many, many reasons, but I think these are two ones that are really sort of central, and I'll define what each of these is. So it's compassion fade, kind of get what that is, and then some North American mindsets that are kind of unique to our North American context. The first one is, you might be familiar with this concept, is that when the number of people or the scale of the problem begins to seem too large, people just, it seems hopeless, right? And so when we say 40,000 people die, this is something like Fred and I hear all the time in our field. When we go to conferences, people will say 40,000 people are dying every year on our roads. Why isn't there more care in the community and among politicians? And largely it is this idea that, well, what are we supposed to do about it? Every year we have this problem. We have roughly this many every single year. What can we possibly do? It might be hopeless, right? And then related to that are these sort of mindsets, or basically ways that we can organize, that we tend to organize. These are mostly tacit ways of organizing our lived experience and normalizing and problematizing the status quo. You might be familiar with a lot of these and probably see them a lot. So individualism is the notion that what befalls you is your fault and your fault alone. How many times have you seen cyclists who are hit being blamed for being hit, right? Anyone see that? I see it all the time. We see it in the reports all the time. This otherism too. We see this, right, in the cycling and walking community. If they get a separated bike lane, that means you're taking a lane away from my driving, right? It's a zero-sum competition among different road users or whomever it might be, two groups that see each other as different. And then this fatalism idea, right, is that And we hear it all the time from engineers in the field. We'll say, well, we need to redesign the roads to slow drivers down. And they'll say, we can do whatever we want with the roads. Drivers are still going to speed. This is fatalism, right? And especially now we're in a state where we have a lot of people out there who really truly believe deeply in the ineptitude of our government. So this leads more to this fatalism around this. These are problems that are basically, these mindsets are all derailing the progress we need to be making in order to make this safer and healthy transportation options viable for people. So something we looked at is really how are traffic crashes, when things go bad in our transportation system, how are these things talked about? How are they framed? So framing, if you're not familiar with the concept, it's pretty straightforward in the fact that it kind of does provide a bit of a frame around what you should be focusing your attention on. And I'll go into more detail what we mean by this. But often in terms of crashes, they'll talk about who's involved, how are they involved, and who might be responsible for a traffic crash. Our colleagues, Kelsey Ralph and Tara Goddard and others have looked at this before with respect to walking and biking. We worked with our School of Journalism. So my colleagues at the Highway Safety Research Center, we reached out to our school journalism colleagues, and they were really excited to work on this with us. They have never done this before, and we had never looked at this subject before, so we were both quite excited to jump in. One of the things we quickly learned was that when TV news agencies post these on social media, they tend to do so on Facebook, and there's a lot of engagement on Facebook, we found. Facebook also was basically achieved, about 50% of adults in the US started getting their news at least part of the time on Facebook starting in 2012. Now it's more than that. So this is why we looked at 2012. 2012 was also the time before Vision Zero really did arrive in the US. It arrived first in New York City in around 2014. So we want to look at this period kind of before Vision Zero in any of the cities, all the way through 2019 is where our study sort of ended, just given time frame. We want to look at to see if there was any effect that the Vision Zero cities had maybe on the way this is talked about in the news media, that is traffic crashes. And then the third one is we wanted to see what kind of types of crash reporting, based upon journalistic practices. So I'll talk about analysis that we did there and what that sort of implies about what we can do to change the narrative. For our method basically was to look at the two most viewed TV broadcast news stations. We looked at the Nielsen ratings. And these were viewed by millions of people within these CBSAs, hundreds of thousands if they were smaller. We had half and half where 9 CBSAs, or these core-based statistical areas, had a Vision Zero city that was a principal one, and had a Vision Zero city adopted by 2019. The other CBSAs did not have this at the time. And so these are the Vision Zero adopting and non-Vision Zero adopting CBSAs in the cities that they were broadcast from, basically. I will note that 2 of them, Houston and Orlando, have since 2019 adopted Vision Zero. So this was sort of a quasi-representative sample of TV news agencies in the US. We were able to identify about 1,100 different crash stories, and we really did a sort of a deep dive into each one of those. We looked at the details, what time of day were these crashes occurring, the light, which kind of modes were involved, was there references to any drug or alcohol use, did they mention the physical environment at all, did they identify who was at fault, any legal ramifications? And then we really were interested too in the framing devices. So this is more on the journalist side of things. Did they use, and I'll talk about what this means, thematic versus episodic frames? Did they employ victim narratives? Did they talk about vehicles or drivers? Often you see they talk about vehicles like as though they're not driven by anyone, right? So we wanted to see, did they actually talk about drivers as people? So we looked at all of this. And given Facebook, so when the news agency posted something on Facebook, people then reacted to it, and they reacted a lot to it. We were really surprised, the number. So they could select one of those emoticons you see at the bottom there. They could share it and they could comment. As you can imagine, sharing and commenting is a little more involved, a little more thinking going on there. We use these sort of regression models based upon the distributions of these things. And then we wanted to see the unique effect, if there was any, of the TV news source. So this is where that random intercept comes in. When we looked just at who's involved in again, this 1,100 stories that we looked at, we see that it mirrored basically what we generally see in the national crash statistics. A little fewer car drivers, a little fewer SUV and truck, and a little more motorcyclists involved than typical, but generally very similar patterns that we see, distributions. As you can see, pedestrians and then cyclists. Pedestrians involved a little more than 15%, and cyclists in about 3% of these stories. So when we look at, and feel free, please, to ask any questions throughout this. The number of, as you can see, the numbers were quite high. They ranged usually from about 150 to well over 1,000 reactions to a single story. Where we saw more reaction was when there was a fatality. An agentic driver means a driver that also had the active voice. So it wasn't that the pedestrian was hit by a driver, it was the driver hit the pedestrian. So it's that active driver, agentic driver. If there are people quoted like witnesses or elected officials, if they use a victim narrative, which is basically focusing on sort of non-crash details of the victim in this case, and then youth or people under 18. As you can see on the left, this was fewer than expected reactions. We have basically the pedestrians, cyclists, motorcyclists, train crashes, and then we have at fault determination. So when drivers and SUV or truck drivers were considered at fault, or at least framed that way in the story, there was just far less reaction. So this is one of those emoticons that they use. And on to sharing. So this is when people wanted to share these stories with others on their Facebook page. We see that there's more sharing when, again, youth were involved, so younger than 18, when there was an SUV or truck involved in the crash, or if legal consequences were mentioned. If, again, at fault, heavy goods vehicle drivers or SUV truck drivers are at fault, not a lot of sharing. Young adults and older adults, not so much sharing. In fact, we saw this clearly, and there was just far less engagement when there was anyone besides youth really involved. So there's more sharing again with youth and these other legal kind of ramifications. Now commenting. So you imagine commenting involves a little more energy, a little more effort put into this. They were saying some things, some pretty denigrating, some were expressing a lot of sorrow for what happened to these people in the crashes. But again, you see fewer comments related to cyclists, pedestrians, that at-fault driver again. And then if there was a motorist delay frame, so this frame would be talking about the travel delays for motorists. Again, more commenting when youth, and then when we have people quoted. So elected officials, if they were featured in the news story, or if witnesses were quoted, we had more commenting. Relative to our second question, we wanted to see Vision Zero communities versus non-Vision Zero. So these are broad regions, or the CBSAs. We found that those with Vision Zero in them, they were 28% less likely than the other groups to use accident to describe a crash, more likely to say collision or wreck, things like that. 39% less likely to focus the reader's attention on the pedestrians, bicyclists, and motorcyclists. Instead, what they tended to focus on were actually the drivers involved. and sometimes they were talking in more thematic ways, meaning that this crash is part of a string of crashes we've seen in this community, or this crash occurred on a really dangerous road with multiple lanes and high-speed traffic. And then there are 2.5 times more likely to quote elected officials. So as you can imagine, in Vision Zero communities, elected officials often are more on board with safety interventions. So they were featured quite a bit more in the Vision Zero TV New Jays and choosing those CBSAs. In this last part of this, we wanted to understand, based upon the way the journalists were framing and talking about crashes, what were the kind of patterns we saw? If we threw everything in and they sort of started grouping them together, they fell into 2 basic groups. One was a travel delay focus, or about half the posts, and 2 were driver and victim focused. And I'll talk just a little bit about what we mean by this. So what you'll see on the bottom here is what we were looking at in terms of, did the journalists themselves have any sort of latitude? Did they make, these were kind of decisions that they made. They made decisions about who they might have quoted and included in their story. They may have made decisions around which groups they focused on, if they framed it as an agentic driver rather than a passive vehicle, if they used accident or crash or collision, or if they talked about motorist delay. And as you can see in class 1, motorist delay was far more likely to appear in this class 1. And really nothing else was more likely to appear. On class 2, we have those agentic drivers really to the fore. We have victim narratives much more likely, thematic frames more likely, and then people more likely to be quoted. So it's much more complex in class 2. Class 1 was almost all about the driver delay. In fact, we looked at a few of these, or we looked at 36 of these news agencies. We found that a few of them actually have adopted a travel delay focused approach to reporting. The issue with these is that they most often lacked victims, as though these are victimless things happening. They featured vehicles rather than those agentic drivers, and they implied that the isolated crash events just simply happened, that they weren't connected to any other crash. The real trouble with these was that around 40% of them, of these travel delay framed ones, would basically involve someone who died in the crash. So 1 or more people died in a crash, and it's still predominantly framed as something that basically delays your travel. As you can imagine, this is really concerning because we want people to care about people dying in road trauma. Talking about, oh yeah, someone died and your commute is delayed, is not the way we get people to care about other people. We definitely saw, as you saw from the other slides there, if people who were younger were involved in the crash, there was far more engagement. This is actually seen really interestingly in a Belgian study by De Sunik and colleagues a few years ago. And they saw the same thing, overrepresentation of youth. And they argued that it might contribute to their shift in Belgium towards chauffeuring children to places like school. We've seen the same thing unfold. You're probably aware of this in the US, that in recent decades, fewer kids are walking and biking to school. Despite efforts even of Safe Routes to School programming and things, we've seen basically a flatlining on the last decade of that. Only about 10 to 12% walk and bike to school versus 50 years ago, that was more like 50%. And for this group here, I'm a huge biking and walking advocate myself, and this was troubling. Far less engagement with stories featuring pedestrians, cyclists, motorcyclists, people using trains. We surmise, as other research has, that because these are less used modes, or less commonly used travel modes in the US, the public just may not identify with them as readily as they would drivers of cars and SUVs and trucks. So one of the things we've concluded from all of this, if you see this graph here, you'll see the way the public and decision makers tend to learn about road trauma is through the news media. It's almost never from, it's sometimes if the elected officials will hear from staff around these issues, but the first primary source is news media. If we had, you see floating above this graphic here, the transportation and public health professionals talking to police, talking to the news media and more regularly, I think we'd be in a better space, because they can speak more to the contextual nature of these crashes. They can speak more to what is being done to improve safety for everyone. So is that we actually put together a guide about this very subject. So you can actually download that for free here. It's actually a pretty, I think, relatively straightforward guide that's for this group. It could be for advocates as well, I think. It's really about the way we talk about these things can be humanizing or not, can be helpful or not. And so we wanted to provide some guidance there, along with our journalist colleagues. And the way we see this is basically through this approach. I'll define each of these. But we think it's kind of critical to reframe the conversation around traffic injury and to address these harmful mindsets of individualism, otherism, and fatalism in these three ways. We appeal to people's intrinsic value. Most of us actually, probably contrary to popular belief, we do really value our friendships and our families very much. And if we evoke the same concern for others in a lot of these stories, we can humanize what's happening to people and how people are affected. So really work with people in this again, speaking to journalist colleagues, but even people within the field of transportation, public health, injury prevention, things like this. Speak to people who are affected by this, because there are many. For every fatality, you saw about 40,000, there's at least 100 serious injuries as well. This is affecting so many people and their families. We need this to come to the fore. Place traffic injury, this again for our journalist friends, please, if you can, place it in a broader place-based context. Some examples of this are, this is the 5th serious crash on Palms Boulevard this year, or the area where the driver struck the pedestrian. Notice the agentic driver. The driver struck the pedestrian, lacks lighting and clearly marked crosswalks. Talk about the environment. Is the environment conducive and safe for walking? If it's not, why? Is anything being done about it, right? Focus on these things. What it does is it takes the focus off the road users onto places where the crashes are occurring. And it addresses this individualism and otherism, right? You now see humans that are being affected by this. You now see that maybe it isn't that individual's fault, that maybe it's part of the system that's fault, right? So focusing on places over people, it really can inspire readers and viewers to call for collective action. That's what we need more of, right? We need more community support around this. And then one of the wonderful things about American culture too is that we do have this sort of deep-seated pragmatic can-doism, right? Too often we see this traffic injury as something that delays traffic or that is inevitable or even expected in our, in our economy and things like this. But if we frame them as preventable, addressable through common sense, slow travel speeds, separate people inside and outside of motor vehicles, either in space or time. These are very common sense things that most people can grasp pretty readily. These can reduce fatalism about road injury and tap into, again, to that American sense of can-do. Identify opportunities to get involved. There's so many ways, right? Is anyone going to be celebrating? I don't even know if it's that, right? Or observing World Day of Remembrance. This happens every 3rd Sunday in November. This is something where the victims of traffic violence, of road trauma, they come, the family, the friends, they come out and, have vigils for people who've lost lives. These are really powerful, a lot of media attention there, and can raise awareness among the public. Other times too, we provide in the guide too, just talking about, daylight saving time. We know once the days start getting shorter, we have more crash events and more injury. Halloween is a really is a time, especially for child pedestrians. First day of school, university, all these different breaks that we see where travel tends to sort of pick up. And then any time like cities or towns, counties, states that are doing anything to improve safety, really starting to get out there and engaging with the public quite a lot, and educating about why these changes are needed. So any policy changes, retrofits, traffic calming, things like this, just get the public engaged in what's happening and why these changes are needed. So I'll end on this note here, is that one of the things we've noticed in looking through all of these stories that are featured, one, it's harrowing to read this. It's actually quasi-traumatic to read a lot about this death and stuff in the news over and over again. But one is that the crash not accident dialogue is really helpful. We've seen it pick up. We've seen a lot less use of accident, and this is a preventable crash. We need to start talking about how our culture right now is really privileging speed and automobility over everything else, basically. Equitable access to and participation in civic life. This is what we really want for everyone. The news story should be one that is told by people reflective of our population, those involved in and affected by serious crashes, and the lack of, all of this bike, ped, and transit access to community life. And the story needs to convey how injuries and inaccessibility occur and exist in some places more often than in others, and how together we can improve road user safety and equitable access, and how these improvements benefit every single one of us. So I want to thank you. I'll leave my sort of contact information here if you'd like to continue the discussion. And certainly open it up if you want to have any discussion now, but just thank you so much for your attention and for the invitation to speak with you all.
Okay, do folks have any questions or comments at this time? Feel free to have a little bit of discussion about this. That was a fascinating presentation. Yeah, Matt, go ahead. Well, actually, Kathy, you're a guest, so by all means.
Oh, either way, I just want to mention that in Ann Arbor, after a student was killed in an unlit crosswalk, a group was formed, A2 Safe Transport, that still exists. And it's really similar to Families for Safe Streets. I attended at one of their meetings in New York City before the pandemic. And I agree that when you can personalize the issues, it really helps. And I found that group to be very, very effective. So thanks for your presentation. Yeah. It's very interesting.
Thank you, Kathy. Yeah, that sounds like a great group.
So,
yeah,
and
we definitely have found. Yeah, please.
Oh, I just want to mention that I am on city council right now. So there's a lot of pressure to deliver safe solutions, and Washtenaw Biking and Walking Coalition is a very strong advocate.
That's wonderful. Yeah, you seem like you guys are really organized and passionate, which is really awesome to see.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, Matt, go ahead.
Sure. I just was gonna ask about how you, and part of the presentation, there was the, less than or more than expected kind of engagement for some of the news media. And I was wondering if there was like a baseline for all those for an expected engagement, or if the expected engagement kind of varies between different kinds of ways that the articles are portrayed. And then also on that, with kind of along the lines of that is, I hear often that certain news media things are like, they bring more clicks in, they'll post a headline just to try to get that engagement. And it's one of the ways I see that oftentimes is when you say traffic delays sometimes I'll see articles where it's like, oh, there's this construction going on and it's going to cause all sorts of traffic, is it in an effort to try to marginalize a certain group or to, kind of pit people against each other in a way.
Yeah, man, well, your first question. Yes, in each of the models, basically, one of the things we looked at was it was sort of a mean, if you will. It was really a sort of incident rate figure that we were looking at, and if it was statistically significant and lower than 1, we were like, oh, this is less than what we would kind of expect if all else equal, if you will. If it was more than, we said, wow, there's a lot more engagement again than what we would expect. And I think when we looked at those, so when we grouped them into those classes, to your second point around, they're looking for clicks. And it's true, we spoke to quite a few journalists, and one of the things they were explaining to us was, well, yeah, this is what people want to hear. They want to hear about their daily commute, or are they going to be able to get out ahead of the traffic in order, for a vacation? And we found far less engagement actually when they used that class 1 or more travel delay frame. When it was more peopled, when people were quoted and they spoke in more thematic ways, like, oh, this is a terrible issue in this town, this is the 30th time this month, or things like this, then there was more engagement. So the things that we actually are promoting were acquiring a lot more engagement. And we thought that was promising, because we were trying to show them the empirical data on it, like, here, no, these are actually the things that are driving this. And we are working right now with several of them, with several journalists, that is, to start flipping the script, if you will, seeing how that sort of relates, hopefully shifting the dialogue a little bit. Looks like Larry has a question. Is that?
Yeah, I wondered, are there specific communities that you've worked with, the journalists, to try to apply some of these principles?
Yes, we're doing it right now, Larry. So right now we're working with journalists in St. Louis Obispo, in Quebec, in Montreal, and we have a couple in our area in the sort of research triangle. So there's a couple in Raleigh, North Carolina, that we're looking at, one in Charlotte, North Carolina. And we're constantly exploring others as well. So we have people that are working in TV news agencies, and then we have a couple of print, mostly journalists as well. These are people that have covered it in the past, and so they have some experience with it, and have a bit of latitude too, because we found that a lot of times entry-level folks, they really don't have a lot of agency within their agency, if you will, to make decisions. So we're working mostly with sort of more veteran journalists.
You mentioned Raleigh, Charlotte, Quebec, and what? There was another one or two you mentioned.
Yeah, St. Louis Obispo and Charlotte.
Okay, yeah.
And what we're doing, Larry, is pairing them up. Actually, we're playing matchmaker, and we're pairing them up with some of our engineering and planning and injury prevention colleagues. So these are people that study the subject of injury, and they know basically what is in the pipeline for infrastructural changes, things like this. So they can speak to them about, yes, this is a known problem, and we're doing something about it, right?
So if we wanted to try something like that here, the idea would be either for us or for somebody like you to try to communicate with the local journalists.
By all means, yeah. I mean, I think if you want to connect with them, right now, the state of journalism in terms of inciting people to care is pretty much not great. So I think, I think honestly, if you say, hey, let's talk about the people involved in crashes, and let's talk about this as even connected to other crashes, like, you know, this is the 12th crash we had this year or something, would be a far better than what we're seeing in most places. All very great questions.
All right, any
and
further
thank you.
questions? Oh, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to thank you. Thank you so much. And even to eavesdrop on what you all have been up to and what your plans are and things. I think it's wonderful. I'm now consider myself a fan of the Washtenaw Biking and Walking Coalition. So I'll let everyone know.
Excellent, thank you.
Yeah. And thanks again to Fred for the invitation.
All right, let's move on now to the drawing. So let's see, let's get the drawing up. Take it away, Seth.
Yes, I think we have a few donated prizes here for folks that we've randomly selected members' names. So the first one is a bicycle photo print, large format, and that is going to Barbara Lucas. And I think for that one you can reach out to Matt. Is that right? Do you have that? I don't know who has that.
Yeah, I can coordinate the email connection there.
Okay.
Excellent. Yep.
Thank you.
And the second door prize is a $100 gift card for accessories at Human Electric Hybrids. And that is going to Brandon Dimcheff. I'm not sure if he is present.
Well, I don't see him,
but we will let him know.
Yeah.
And then we have 2 copies of a new book that came out recently by Charles Marone called Confessions of a Recovering Engineer. And the first copy is going to Kathy Griswold. And the second copy is going to Julie Boland. Is Julie here? Julie is not here. I will let Julie know. Kathy, I'll send you an email to get the details on that. So, and I think that is the extent of our prizes this evening.
Excellent. Well, let's, I'm going to share my screen one more time here, just to remind folks about membership and, whoops, what I wanted to do is present. There we go. Just to remind folks to become part of the movement, become a member of the WBWC. Donate. We always really appreciate donations. They fund our efforts to improve walking and bicycling in Washtenaw County. And I think, as you can see from the results that we've been getting for our advocacy and our communications, that they get put to good use. And of course, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can subscribe to our newsletter. We've got an issue of the newsletter coming out probably towards the end of the month that will talk about various things going on in the community in regards to our efforts and other groups' efforts. You can join our Google group. We have a Google discussion group. You can go to our website to get the link to join that. There's a lot of great conversation from a lot of passionate people. And you can also attend a board meeting. So our board meeting date or day, I should say, is going to change. So it's now going to be the second Wednesday of the month. We're sort of arranging things a little bit. Several of the board members have young kids and responsibilities related to that. So we had to sort of juggle things around a little bit. So the second Wednesday of the month at 6:30 p.m. Our board meetings will be taking place online for the foreseeable future. And you can volunteer for the WBWC. We have lots of things that folks can do in terms of helping with communications, helping us by attending meetings and reporting back, by doing some investigative work, by networking with other groups, etc. There's a variety of ways in which you can help us and grow the group and help us have a greater impact. And we'd like to thank you so much for coming. Thank you to Seth for presenting, and thank you for to all of our members for attending this meeting and for generally participating in bicycling and walking advocacy in the community. And we do appreciate you coming to our 2021 annual member gathering. And we will probably, in the newsletter, talk about the name change and all of those things that we talked about today that are forthcoming. One thing you may see, depending on how things shake out next year, is we may have an additional event like we did, it was 3 years ago, where we had sort of a meetup. We may do something like that next year just so that people can be in person again at some point. Do any of the other board members have any last parting comments, or any other members have any comments that they'd like to share with the group?
I would just say that this is an important time. There's a lot going on. People can really have an impact on what happens in the community by getting involved in these things. We've got the supportive city council members, supportive staff, and people in public office that want to help make things happen, but they like to hear from the community, and they need to hear from the community about what's needed. So you can really make an impact in the community by getting involved in these things. It's an important time, and if you're interested in this, you can really help change your community for the better.
Kathy, go ahead.
I want to acknowledge all of the work for many, many years that Larry Deck has done. And I think we're finally getting some of the bike paths below the intersection. And I don't think it would be happening without his advocacy over these years. And the other thing is, we have a new interim city administrator, and I believe he's more operations focused than some leaders that we've had in the past. And I'm going to be meeting with him soon, and I'm looking at ways to improve operations as well as to provide more of a feedback loop on what's happening. And so if anyone has any information or ideas that they'd like to share with me, that would be great. And was that clear enough, Jamie? Okay, because I think we're very good at our initiatives, but then we seem to be in a hurry to go to the next initiative before we've sort of refined the previous initiative and improved it if needed. So
Awesome.
I'll stop there, but looking for input.
Awesome. And we appreciate you, Kathy, for showing up and being a council member and advocating for safety. We very much appreciate it.
And likewise, I appreciate your support, Kathy, and helping make things safer for everybody.
Oh, thank you.
Tim, you've got Tim's clapping. Okay. I see. All right. All right, folks. Well, let's call it a night. Look forward to our emailed newsletter. And also feel free to reach out to us if you have any comments or questions, any suggestions for initiatives that you'd like us to look at, any concerns in your area about walking or biking and whatnot. Have yourselves a great night and be safe out there.